That's exactly right. And I do think that it almost ties into what we were just talking about just taking the time to think through things, because people actually don't take the time to think through things. But that also implies maybe a little bit of a lack of intellectual curiosity. I'm fascinated by solver outputs. I'm like, oh, there were these three other things I wasn't even thinking about. And it's just telling me I should try this 15% of the time. Sure, maybe I'll try to find the exact right time that this is okay. But now I've learned that this is actually a positive EV play in some instances, right? So it's actually just learning almost all the potential outcomes and strategies that you have at your disposal, and then obviously like plugging leaks that you might have, and then just really being able to apply it in the right times. Even if you're throwing away those outputs like 90% of the time, it's super valuable, and I think it's really hard to get people to understand that sometimes.
I'm a writer, so I love writing. I find that one way to understand chess or poker better is to write things down. And I don't know if this works for everybody. I mean, I know you've written a book as well, but for me, it's like, it's the best. I actually have journal entries from when I was a little kid where I would just like explain the point of an opening. Of course, there were like many
Oh,
books and many grandmasters who had already explained it, who knew it even better than me. But it was important for me to explain it in my own words, because otherwise I would forget it. I wouldn't. Not only would I not understand it, but I wouldn't forget it. And those two things are very intertwined. And I think that. I mean, I don't play a ton of PLO live. I mean, sometimes I'm starting to try a little bit more of the mixed games online. But I am curious to know, do you play much PLO live yourself?
how about I know the rules of PLO?
Well, how about this? When you play poker and you want to remember like what the suits in a hand, like what's
Yeah.
your general go-to? Do you have like a system, or do you just kind of like say it to yourself, or do you just check after the flop always anyway?
Mostly, so you're asking like how do I maybe remember the hand so I can analyze it later, right?
Oh no, not that's a great question too.
Okay.
No, I just mean literally remember like that if you have ace king off, the ace is a heart and the king is the diamond, as
Oh,
opposed to the king being the heart and the ace the diamond.
you know what I do is it's like a tick. I obsessively check my cards constantly throughout the hand. So
Oh
I
yeah,
don't, I like honestly that's what it is. But it is, I just like say it to myself. Like I try to say like ace of hearts, king of spades, and then that I just try to remember that through the hand. And I'm also trying not to whisper it so that people, can't tell what I have.
nice, nice. Yeah, I mean, I think that is what a lot of people do. It's interesting to me also that there are ways to kind of like chunk things in poker.
Hmm.
And like for instance, in that case, if it was something that it sounds like you don't really have a trouble remembering it. And if you already have the habit of checking your hand throughout the hand, it doesn't really matter because you can always recheck later. But if you're somebody who doesn't really want to do that for whatever reason, because you want to like observe other players, or you're worried that like, you might give something off the second
Yep.
time you checked it, you can, create a new word. So like if it's the club that's the bigger card and the heart that's a smaller card, well, this is going to be corny because I'm a chess player, so that would be chess, right? Because it's like the club that's bigger and the heart that's smaller. But depending what you do, maybe it
Yeah.
could be something different, like chess. And so I think that's just like another example of like a memory trick that kind of relates to words and writing.
Yeah, using these little mental hacks to remember things, I think is fantastic for people, not just and that's what I love about chess and poker is that so much of it applies like broadly to everything, like general knowledge, your work, to everything. And what do you feel about that? Like, how did you feel about how chess maybe helped you become a better poker player, or even get into poker? And then from all that you've learned in chess and poker, how has that helped you in life?
Well, I think chess is a very beautiful game. It's very artistic. It's been around for thousands of years, and it's really taught me, I think, about the flow experience. And that's a beautiful thing. I think that everybody should learn this. Whether they play a game like chess, or they're a musician or an artist, or if they're not, like even if they don't consider themselves an artist, it's like exercise, even just being completely absorbed in the moment. It's often the happiest people are,
Yeah.
and often they become their best selves in these moments. So I think chess really taught me that. In poker, I find it's sometimes harder to find flow because
Hmm.
there's so many people at the table, and sometimes you're just in
Ah.
like regular conversations. But is such a great teacher of financial lessons.
Hmm.
I think that for many people who are born in families where people talk about money and investment, and they kind of understand these principles, there's many people who are left out of those conversations who don't get them. And poker is a really way for you to learn them,
Right.
right? About the importance of like, even, I'm not going to say that this is dead for women, but in general, women tend to be more risk averse, often for rational reasons. I think that people who have less money or less generational wealth are also more risk averse for obvious reasons and for intelligent reasons. But poker will really teach you very quickly that if you don't invest your money, the blinds are going to eat you up. Like that's inflation. So I think that it's a really great way to kind of democratize some of these lessons that are often not really widespread.
Yeah, poker teaches you so much about, calculated risk, about thinking probabilistically, thinking that there are many, many outcomes, and to think more about process than results. There's so many valuable lessons in poker. The negative parts about poker, like the gambling, the degeneracy, some of that kind of stuff is obviously really bad, but there's so much academic, benefits to poker that it's incredible. I did have one last question, and I wanted to go back to what you had said before about how a poker solver might give you a couple of optimal strategies and you pick one of those, but then maybe a coach might say, well, hey, what if your opponent does this, right? What would you do then? So I think so much of poker is about response and adaptability, and I think that's the same thing with chess. So what are your thoughts on that, on adaptability in poker and how that applies to these almost mathematical outputs from solvers?
Totally agree. I feel like so much of poker and also chess, but especially poker, is about being in the moment and being present.
Yeah.
And like I said earlier about the flow experience, that a lot of people are very happy in those moments. And so I think that, you don't want to take that away from people. And I think a lot of that is confidence. To have the confidence in some of the great players, I've ever met in chess and poker, the one thing that they all seem to have is pretty high confidence when they're playing.
Yeah.
So after the game, they might be very hard on themselves. Like, I should have bet less, or
Right.
I should have checked that flop. But in the moment, they're really feeling themselves. And I think that is crucial. And I often talk about that as the switch, because I think when you're playing, you want to err towards overconfident.
That's
Kind of like
right.
a 10 out of 10, but maybe you want to be like a 7 out of 10,
Yeah.
8 out of 10. And then after, hey, you can be like a 4 because, you want to get better. So you want to like really look for your mistakes. You don't want to be hating yourself so much you don't like the game. But you know what I mean? I feel like being able to go from that like 8 to like 4, I feel like not everybody has it. A lot of people are just always going to be an 8 to a 10 and think that they're the greatest.
Right.
And then it's going to always be a 3 or a 4, and they're not going to be able to have that gravitas to excel and to feel present and strong. And so the people who can do both, man, that's really what you want. I think you want it in life too.
Right.
Really do. Like when you go into a meeting or something, you don't want to be like feeling like second guessing yourself and whatnot, but you also want to be able to put in that preparation, which is always like self-critical.
Right. Table presence is so important. And I think people also underestimate that, which is why people tell you or recommend to you, if you start tilting, you should go for a walk and come back and just try to, be able to play well, because your table presence matters so much to how people play against you.
I totally agree. And one thing I think is really good for table presence is posture. And so for me, posture is all about like weight training. And I notice that if I don't do enough weight training, my posture really degrades.
Yeah, that's true.
And so I feel like that's so important. I feel like a lot of people, they maybe had a bad experience with weight training when they were younger, and they don't give it another try. Or they think if they're female, they think it'll change their figure in a way they don't want to change it. And that always makes me sad, because I feel like it has such like health and mental benefits that cardio doesn't quite get you.
Yeah, absolutely. Jennifer, this was absolutely amazing. But before I let you go, you work on so many things and you have your hand in so many things, but any specific projects or initiatives that you're excited about, that's coming up over the next few months or year for you?
Well, I'm super excited that my Grid podcast has relaunched. And so the concept of this is actually similar to the stuff that we're talking about, in that it's the merging of like the theory and the practice of poker. Each episode is a different hand on the poker grid. So I have somebody come to talk about Queen 8 suited or 7 deuce off, and the idea is to click every single hand off. And I started actually kind of as an homage to game theory, and the idea was that the grid is how you study poker, and you flatten it out, and you look at all these hands, and you look at all these strategies. But the truth is that it doesn't work if it's not for the stories, right? So it's always both, and it makes it more beautiful, not less beautiful. And at the time, I thought that was such an important message to send.
It is.
Math can make things more exciting and fun and beautiful, not less.
I think that's the optimal thing to do, which is to humanize some of these like, very cold and calculated outputs. But it seems like the community really liked that because you won a GPI award for that podcast, didn't you?
I did, yes, that's right. Thank you.
Okay, so Jennifer, thank you again so much for coming on the show. This was absolutely amazing to be able to pick your brain. The community is going to love hearing about all your thoughts on game theory, and hopefully people will take many, many things away from this episode.
Thanks so much for having me. I had a great time.